Welcome to Passion for Sound, the channel dedicated to thorough and honest reviews of headphones, earphones, DACs, headphone amps, other components and accessories. Basically everything audio related except power amps and passive speakers. My name's Lachlan and my goal is to explore and discuss all kinds of audio topics, even the controversial ones, to help us all find more enjoyment from music. Thanks for watching and enjoy the video. Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. As you can see, I'm trying a bit of a different setup today. I'm rearranging my office/studio a little bit, so let me know what you think of this more zoomed in approach. Obviously, I'm still going to have some B-roll so you get a good look at the products. So let me know what you think of this. Let me know if it's better, worse, no different, etc. Let me know down in the comments. Today, we're looking at an IEM that for a little while seemed to be the flavour of the month and may have already drifted by the wayside, as is often the case in the world of budget tri-fi IEMs. Specifically, I'm talking about the C Audio Yume, which is a $169 US or 239 Australian dollar hybrid IEM. Before I start talking about the design, the sound quality, some comparisons, let's start with a look at the C Audio Yume. I'd like to kick things off with a huge thanks once again to Melbourne Chi-Fi Audio. Andy over at Melbourne Chi-Fi Audio has been a huge help in getting me in touch with companies like BGVP, C Audio. I've got the Tanchjim Hana review coming up soon, and also the Cat Ear Mia. So I want to say a huge thanks to Andy. There's no kickbacks or affiliates here. He's just helping to provide some product to the channel so that I can then share it with you. It does mean that one of the links I'll put down below for the C Audio Yume will go through to Melbourne Chi-Fi Audio. So if you're here in Australia and after you hear what I have to say, you think the C Audio Yume are a good fit for you, then do think about using the link through to Melbourne Chi-Fi Audio as a way of saying thank you. But for now, let's take a look at the IEM itself. So it comes in, as many of these IEMs do now, a little puck case. I'm not a huge fan of puck cases, as I've covered before, but in the case of the Yume, it's not too bad. And one of the reasons for that is that this is a really compact IEM, despite having a sort of custom style shell design that's terminated into a nozzle with a silicone tip, but otherwise is very much like a custom. So this is a really compact IEM. It's also got this very nice copper cable, which I say nice, in the scheme of things, it's not like a multi-$100 cable, but for a budget IEM cable, I think it's really excellent. It's got good quality terminations at each end, it's got a nice weave, good feeling insulation. All in all, it's really nice. Getting to the IEMs themselves, as I've already mentioned, they're very compact, but on top of that, they're incredibly comfortable. They're molded into a really nice kind of universal custom shape, and I know that's a bit of a tautology, but what I mean by that is they've got the right contours to fit really snugly in the ear while still being a universal. These are one of the most comfortable IEMs I've ever worn, up there with things like the Ray Penta and also the AudioFly range of earphones. So they're incredibly comfortable, very compact, they nestle right in flush with the ear, and I think that's great. I've got some other universals like these and they kind of stick out of the ear a lot, which I'm not a huge fan of. These though disappear right in and it's almost like you're not wearing them. The tip selection is also excellent. I don't think I've strayed away from the original tip that came on them because I really like it, but other than that, there's a great range of tips if you need them. Inside these shells, we've got a single dynamic driver and a couple of balanced armatures. So it's a traditional sort of hybrid approach, nothing too fancy going on there, but the end result is some excellent sound. Before I talk about that sound though, I just want to briefly mention one of the technologies that is in the C Audio Yume. Even though I don't think it's that groundbreaking, it's being marketed a little bit like it is. Specifically, it's what they're calling liquid silicone drivers. Now I did a bit of research on this because liquid silicone kind of makes no sense as a driver where you want the driver to have a sense of rigidity in order to keep the waveform coming off the driver consistent and predictable. What I discovered through my research is that liquid silicone is a semi-soft kind of silicone finish. It's what's used in some phone cases that still retain that little bit of softness and suppleness, but also are quite protective. Now in the case of the drivers in IEMs like the Yume, the benefit of liquid silicone, as I can understand it, is actually in the surround. So many cheap drivers in the past have used a solid plastic driver that's designed to flex and buckle around the edges in order to allow movement of the center of the cone. When using liquid silicone drivers though, what's happening is the edges of that driver are now flexible like those phone cases I mentioned, and therefore will allow much better movement of the driver without necessarily having to break up the cone as much. I'm assuming therefore that there is some kind of rigid coating over the top of the center of the driver in order to prevent it from buckling, warping, and generally wobbling there, as liquid silicone, based on my understanding, would allow it to do. So I'm not sure what the hard coating is that they're using to prevent that breakup, but based on the sound of them, something's being done because the sound is very clean and very precise. So I'm not going to sit here and suggest that liquid silicone is the most amazing thing under the sun and you should absolutely go out and buy a pair of liquid silicone drivers. The same as graphene and titanium coated drivers. There's been all sorts of different attempts and they all have their pros and cons. So this is just another one of those that's doing what sounds like a very good job, but it isn't a total game changer from what I can hear out of the Yumes. And now that we're erring towards sound quality, let's dive in deep and talk about the sound. The Yumes are a really enjoyable, clean, clear, slightly neutral, maybe ever so slightly dry sounding earphone, but tonality wise, they are fantastic. Now, Crinical's raved about these a bit on his blog. I don't always agree with what he hears, but on this one I'm going to say that tonally, in the most part, I think he's spot on. I'm not suggesting that he's right or wrong in any particular situation, my point being more that sometimes his preferences and his perceptions differ from my preferences and my perceptions. But on this occasion, I'm agreeing almost wholeheartedly that these are an absolute wonder in terms of tonality. There is one little fly in the ointment, which I'll get to in a second though. The treble from the Yumes overall is very clean, nicely extended, but you don't really notice it, and I mean that in a good way. It's just there, it's enough, it's well balanced with the rest of the signature, and it just helps the IEM to sound clean and crisp and resolving. While we're speaking resolution, these are a fantastically resolving earphone at the price point, so around that $170 mark, you're going to have a hard time finding anything that out-resolves the Yumes. And they don't do it in a nasty analytical way, they do it in a really well-balanced musical presentation. Moving down into the mids, things stay equally good through the mids for the most part. I do find them ever so slightly dry, and that's where I probably differ slightly from Critical in not giving them an absolute 100% mark here, but they're exceptionally good, they're just a tiny touch dry. Again, resolution is excellent, weight is generally pretty good, but where things come undone slightly is that there is a lack of bass from the Yumes. They roll off a bit too soon, they have a lower level of bass compared to the mids and the treble perceptually speaking, and that to me is where they don't quite hit the mark for perfect tonality, because to me, tone includes everything across the frequency range, and therefore by not having the bass to match up with the mids and the treble, things do tilt a little bit lean and a little bit dry in the mid-range and the treble overall. I'll give you a couple of specific examples of this in a moment, but first I want to talk about soundstage, which is also excellent from the Yumes. It extends nice and wide, it's relatively high and comes up sort of into the forehead area, but it doesn't go outside your head, it's not particularly huge, but it's really well defined and has a great sense of space. Again, for an IEM at this price, I think the Yumes are pretty special. I just wish they had a little bit more bass to bring everything together as one beautiful presentation of very natural, lifelike music. As it is, they're incredibly enjoyable, but they're not entirely lifelike. And to put that in perspective, let's talk about a test track I used. The test track's called It's All Coming Back by Keb Mo. And listening to this track, I found that the textures and the timbre of his vocals and the guitars were both fantastic. In this particular recording, there's an acoustic steel string guitar in the left and there's an electric guitar in the right. They were both really beautifully rendered and also very, very clear and had a nice sense of tonality. With the Yumes, they were both beautifully rendered with a sense of clarity and a good tonality, both in terms of weight but also texture of those instruments. As I've already alluded to, the only thing missing for me was a little bit of bass. And so at this point, what I was pretty clear on was that the Yumes were doing everything really, really well with just the need for a bit of bass. if you were to add that in, they would be absolutely out of this world. And so I started thinking comparisons at this time, and while I was listening to It's All Coming Back, I tried out the Tanchjim Hana IEM. Now, I mentioned these before on the channel, the review of them's coming up soon. They're a beautiful looking and feeling IEM, and they're very similarly priced to the Yume. At $160 US, there's only $9 US difference. So I plugged these in and listened to It's All Coming Back with these and also the Yume side by side. And what I found as I listened to the two was that the Hanas felt just a little bit boxy, a little bit kind of closed in the soundstage, and a little bit unnatural in the vocals. The resolution and the clarity of the Yume was nowhere to be found, and those two guitars that I mentioned before, the acoustic steel string and the electric, were both there, but they weren't as clearly defined and resolved. So it really showed me just how good the Yumes are, and if you're not looking for a particularly warm, rich experience and you're happy to have it a bit leaner and a little bit drier, the Yumes really are fantastic. But now that we've opened the box and started talking about the Hanas, I just want to flag a couple of reasons why you might choose something like the Hana over the Yume. You see, as I listened to more and more tracks, what I found was that occasionally you would hit a moment of magic with the Hana that the Yume never quite can manage. The Hana has a slightly imbalanced tonality overall compared to the very consistent and clear tonality of the Yume, but on certain tracks, like Holding On by Gregory Porter, the Hanas just came alive with the music. Things like the sound of the toms and the sound of the piano sounded so much more rich and harmonic through the Hanas, whereas the Yumes left it all sounding a bit cold and a little bit clinical. So that's going to be a trade-off. If you want kind of more technical perfection, the Yumes are definitely going to be the better choice out of these two. But if you want that bit of magic and that bit of soul at the expense of some technicalities, the Hanas I think do have a place. The Hanas also look and feel beautiful, so in terms of design and quality, I think both are excellent. It's going to come down to what your tastes are in terms of musicality, whether you want those occasional moments of euphonic bliss, or whether you're more happy to have a consistent, technically superior delivery, which is what you're going to get from the Yumes. So at this point, having identified that both had their place, but the Yume was technically superior and definitely worth that $9 US extra, I thought it was time for one more quick comparison. Enjoying this video? If you are and you'd like to help me make more videos like this one, there are lots of ways you can help, and most of them don't cost you a cent. You can help for free by liking this video, subscribing and ringing the bell, sharing this video on social media or your favorite audio forums, or by making your next purchases using any of the affiliate links in the description. Obviously that's not technically free, but you're not spending anything extra and it all helps out. Want to go a step further? You could buy some merchandise, t-shirt, hoodies, caps and the like, or you can join the Passion for Sound family on Patreon. It's a growing community with plenty of interesting discussion and your chance to influence what happens on the channel. Check out the description for more information and links where relevant. But for now, let's get back to the video. And that came in the form of the Shozy Form 1.4s. Now, I reviewed these on the channel. I really loved them and I've often recommended them despite the fact that they're a little bit quirky. They've got a very distinct tuning and a very distinct presentation that some people aren't going to like. I personally think they're fantastic, but I think they're fantastic because of what they do to the sound, as opposed to them being technically perfect or accurate or anything like that. Immediately when comparing these to the Yumes, they're a lot more full sounding. They've got more bass coming through from their dynamic driver, and everything's a bit richer and a bit punchier as a result. One of the tracks that I happen to have on was The Gift by In Excess, so that's a rock track with a really driving bass line, and immediately it became clear that the Yume couldn't give me the dynamics and the excitement that I wanted, whereas the Form 1.4 had it in spades. It's not technically a match for the Yumes in many ways, but it was so much more enjoyable and engaging. Much like the Hana, the Form 1.4 is also a bit inconsistent with its tuning. It's got a few bumps and peaks and troughs in its tuning, and that leads to both moments of magic, but also moments where it doesn't gel quite as well with certain tracks. It's probably more consistent than the Hana in that regard, but it's not as consistent as the Yume. What it does do though, is it does amazing things with staging. It produces this incredible image right up around the forehead and spaces everything out in this vast expanse around it. The Yume can't quite match that, and so in that sense, it's not as exciting a listen as something like the Form 1.4s, with both the bass from the 1.4s, but also that staging presentation. On the other hand, I do think the Form 1.4s fall behind a little tiny bit in resolution, and that's going to be largely due to the lack of bass in the Yume, allowing details in the mids and the treble to come forward. So really, all three of these earphones, in my opinion, are definitely worth considering. The Yumes are technically the superior earphone out of all three, I believe, because they consistently sound fantastic, albeit a little bit lean on the bass. If you're not in a position to spend more than that sort of $160, $170 and you want something a bit more exciting at times, then the Hana is a really nice option. And I'll be doing a full review of that one soon, so hit the subscribe button if you want to check that out. If you can spend more and you want a really interesting sonic experience, the Form 1.4s are still an earphone that I'd recommend, even having heard these other two. But coming back around to focus on the Yume for a conclusion, I think the Yume is an earphone you should absolutely consider if you're looking in that $150 to $200 range. It's really, really impressive what it does. It's incredibly comfortable and beautifully made so it fits nicely in the ear, and it's a really hard earphone to pass up at the price and for its performance. The only caveat, of course, being what I've already covered significantly here, is that it's not going to be great for those that love their bass. You can always add a bit of EQ, of course, but in its stock form, it's a little bit lean, it's a little bit analytical, but it's still very, very enjoyable. Not too bright, never harsh, just very, very neutral and clean. So if that sounds like an earphone that you'd enjoy and you're here in Australia, do make sure you check out the link to Melbourne Hi-Fi Audio to say thanks for making this review possible. If you're in other parts of the world, I'll put a more global link to the C Audio Yume down in the description as well. But for now, I'm going to leave you to the music, so happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.